My parents always treated me like I was a burden, but when I bought a car for $80,000, they demanded it from me and then sued me when I refused. That moment marked the beginning of an unbelievable ordeal, but I realize now that this story stretches back much further. For years, I've needed to get this off my chest. I've spent countless hours reading posts online from people who grew up in homes where love was just a hollow word. It's comforting to know I'm not alone, but my story still weighs heavily on me. Maybe someone out there will relate to what I went through. For as long as I can remember, my parents made it clear that I wasn't wanted. My mom, Grace, was the master of backhanded compliments, while my dad, Robert, didn't need to say much at all. His silence was punishment enough. But when he did speak, his words were like bullets, leaving wounds that never healed. He was never around when I needed him, and when he was, I wished he wasn't. Living in that house was like walking through a minefield. Every step had to be calculated, and the tension was unbearable. Every day was a new opportunity to disappoint them, to anger them, to disgust them. It seemed like everything I did set them off. For some reason, I was always the target. My older brother, James, on the other hand, could do no wrong. He was the golden child, always receiving praise for things as minor as passing a test. I'll never forget one incident when I was about 9 years old. James dared me to throw a ball in the house, something we were absolutely not allowed to do. Of course, I took the dare, and the ball hit a vase that shattered into pieces. As soon as it happened, James started crying and ran to get our mom. Grace stormed into the room, furious, and before I could even explain, she was yelling, "Why can't you be more like James? He never causes trouble. You're always screwing up." James got rewarded with ice cream that night while I was sent to bed without dinner. That pattern played out so many times that it became the norm. School was my only escape. I didn't have many friends, but at least the teachers didn't scream at me, and the kids at school didn't treat me like trash, at least, not at first. But by middle school, I became a target for bullies too. It wasn't just teasing either. It was like they could smell the brokenness on me. I was tall for my age, lanky, and awkward, which made me an easy target. They called me Giraffe, Freak, and shoved me in the hallways. One time, a group of kids locked me in a janitor's closet for hours during lunch. I pounded on the door until my knuckles bled, but no one came. When I told my parents about it, Robert just shrugged and said, "Man up, Eric. Life's tough." And that was the end of that. By high school, I had given up. I stopped trying at school, and my grades plummeted. I barely managed to graduate. I didn't care anymore. What was the point? No matter what I did, I felt like I was just a failure in their eyes. Then, during my junior year, something strange happened. I made the track team. Running was the only thing that gave me a sense of freedom. For a few moments, when I was out on the track, I could escape all the chaos at home. It didn't matter that I wasn't the best runner. It was enough that I was good at something. We had a big meet coming up, and I worked up the courage to ask Grace to come watch. I didn't expect much, but for the first time in years, I wanted to believe that maybe she'd show up. She barely looked up from her phone when I asked, muttering, "We'll see." Spoiler, she didn't come. She didn't come to any meet that entire season. It shouldn't have surprised me, but it still hurt. What made it worse was watching all the other kids with their parents cheering them on. Mine couldn't be bothered. The lowest point came after one of the meets when I overheard Grace on the phone. She was laughing with a friend, talking about me. "Eric's such a loser," she said. "He's never going to amount to anything." She had no idea I was standing around the corner listening. That was the moment I realized she didn't just resent me, she hated me. And from that point on, I started hating myself too. Somehow, I managed to get into a local university. Not because I was smart, but because I just needed to get out of that house. I didn't care what I studied or whether I even graduated. I just needed to escape. But even college didn't bring the relief I hoped for. I didn't fit in. Everyone around me seemed to have their lives together while I was barely holding mine together with duct tape and prayers. I tried to make friends, but no matter how hard I tried, I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. One night, during finals week, I hit my breaking point. I hadn't slept in days, and I locked myself in my dorm room and cried for hours. I thought about dropping out, thought about ending it all, to be honest. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was some small sliver of hope that things might get better. I don't know. But I decided to keep pushing through, even though it felt impossible. After graduation, things got even worse. I had no job, no money, and I was forced to move back in with my parents. Grace and Robert made it clear that I was an unwelcome guest in their home. Why are you even here? Robert would say, "You're an adult now. Act like it." But they didn't understand that I couldn't just fix my life overnight. Every time I applied for a job, I got rejected. Every time I tried to save money, something would drain it all. I was trapped. One night, after another fight with Grace, she said something I'll never forget. "I wish you had never been born," she screamed. "You've ruined everything." That was the moment I knew I had to leave, no matter what it took. I packed my bags that night, not knowing where I was going or how I would survive. I didn't have a plan, just a suitcase and a little bit of cash I had saved up. I moved to a new city, far away from my parents, and found a job. Not a glamorous one, but enough to get by. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Eventually, I found a job at a tech company's customer service center. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but I didn't care. I worked hard, and within 6 months, I was promoted to team lead. A year later, I became a supervisor, and I finally started to feel like I was getting my life together. I saved every penny I could, and after years of barely scraping by, I decided to treat myself. That's when I bought the car, a sleek, brand new luxury car. It cost $80,000, more money than I'd ever imagined spending on anything, but I didn't care. It was a symbol of how far I had come. Then, out of nowhere, my parents showed up again. One Saturday afternoon, I was at home, relaxing after a long week of work, when I heard a knock on the door. I opened it, and there they were, Grace and Robert, standing on my doorstep as if no time had passed at all. "Eric," Grace said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "we've fallen on hard times. We saw your car outside and thought maybe you could help us out. Could you let us borrow it for a while?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents, who had made my childhood a living hell, were now asking for my $80,000 car, the one thing I had worked so hard for. I said no, of course, and that's when Robert stepped forward, his face darkening. "You owe us," he said. "After everything we've done for you, the least you could do is help us out." I couldn't help but laugh in their faces. "Everything you've done for me?" I asked. "You mean the emotional abuse, the neglect, and the years of making me feel like I was nothing? I don't owe you anything." I slammed the door in their faces, thinking that was the end of it, but I underestimated them. A week later, I received a letter from a lawyer. My parents were suing me, claiming they had helped me financially and were entitled to part of my assets, specifically the car. I was floored. I couldn't believe their audacity. I hadn't taken a penny from them since I left home. They had drained me emotionally and financially for years, and now they wanted to take me to court over a car? I contacted a lawyer, a sharp woman named Alice, who came highly recommended by a coworker. Alice assured me that we had a strong case, and we fought back. The lawsuit dragged on for months. In court, my parents lied, painting me as an ungrateful son who had abandoned them after all they had done for me. But Alice was relentless. She tore their case apart, bringing in witnesses who could testify to the abuse I had suffered as a child. Former teachers testified about how withdrawn and unhappy I was, and friends from my childhood confirmed how my parents had treated me. In the end, the judge saw through their lies. He dismissed their lawsuit and ordered them to pay my legal fees. I cut them off for good after that. I blocked their numbers, deleted their contact information, and moved on with my life. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. A few months later, someone else showed up, Tom, an old drinking buddy of my dad's. He arrived at my door one evening, drunk, accusing me of ignoring him. I tried to calm him down and get him to leave, but instead, he forced his way into my apartment and attacked me. Tom was much bigger and stronger than me, and he beat me until I was barely conscious. Blood poured from my nose, and I could barely breathe. Thankfully, my neighbors heard the commotion and called the police. They pulled Tom off me and arrested him. He was charged with assault, and I spent weeks recovering from my injuries. The experience shook me to my core. For a long time, I struggled with nightmares and flashbacks of the attack. But in the end, I realized something. I had survived. I had survived my parents, I had survived Tom, and I had come out stronger. Now, I'm still here, still working hard, still driving the car I bought with my own money, and still building the life I deserve. I've learned that family doesn't have the right to abuse you, to take from you, or to control your life. I've learned that I am worth more than the way they treated me. And now, for the first time in my life, I'm truly free.